you're one of the speakers, I think, at the Faith That Builds Worlds conference.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I wish I could go to that. It sounds like such an absolutely incredible thing. So I'm stoked to have you with us. We love Lewis and Tolkien for sure on this channel.
That's good.
My gosh, you've
It's a
got
requirement
Nazgûl
for me to attend.
stuff above your.
I built, I built a Witch King of Angmar costume for Halloween 2 years ago. So yeah, that's just in case if I ever need it. It's good to have.
Amazing. John, what do you do? What do you get up to? What's your latest project these days?
Yeah, so I do a lot of things that are different activities in illustration and writing. So graphic novels, picture books, comics. And then I also am chair of a graduate program here at WashU in St. Louis, which is about illustration and visual culture. So my next project, I'm working on a picture book right now. And then after that, I've got my next long form graphic novel is a retelling of the Salem Witch Trials.
Ooh, how much am I allowed to ask you about that?
As much as you want.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. That sounds fun. So why don't we start with that, and then let's go into a little bit of your story, your origin myth, and then we can sort of cap it off with a little bit about this conference and yeah, what you're presenting at it. So yeah, this novel sounds epic. Why are you getting into that?
I'm really interested in the church as a fellowship, as a concept, and how the church interacts with the world. So my first graphic novel was about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, was a theologian that joined a plot to assassinate Hitler. And my second long-form graphic novel was about the Inklings, Tolkien and Lewis, and a very generative fellowship. And then this one is more about a destructive church community and what we can learn from the Puritans, who, believe it or not, I sort of think they get a bad rap. I'm not going to apologize or tell people that they need to get on board with the Puritans, but I am really interested in the concept of fear and the demonology of the church and how it distorted a community. And I think there's still a lot of lessons we can take from it that don't include, actually that religion is bad. I think that's a wrong conclusion to take from Salem.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I just over the last couple of weeks I've watched two movies related sort of to this. One was what was it called? The Witch, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, set right in that same time period there. And then the other one was The Ritual, set kind of in Amsterdam wilds and stuff, or Denmark wilds, whatever. I thought that was amazing. So what pulls you in? Okay, so by the way, you mentioned Lewis and Tolkien. You know what I always thought would be hilarious and fun and awesome to have? Would be to have like a kid's show or a graphic novel or something of the Inklings as boys, and which would have been totally impossible. But as boys getting up to all kinds of adventures that would sort of foreshadow all the stuff they would imagine later.
Well, you know what? There's a book coming out that I just blurbed. I read it recently called The Inklings Detective Society, and
Oh, that's
it's a
amazing.
sort of fan fiction reimagining of the Inklings as their own sort of detective shop that
Man,
like
I'm
solves
depressed now.
murders.
That sounds fantastic. All right, there goes
Right?
my
No,
idea.
it's one of those ideas where you're like, oh my gosh, why did I think of that?
How does
Yeah.
this not exist? Okay. So how are you what's your story with this? I have no idea how to construct a graphic novel. With this channel, a lot of what we do is try to write novels. So there's not a lot of art and artists. At least it's not like a major focus for our community. We're mostly all about write good and getting words on pages. And some of our members, our artists, some of them are really good, but we're not really here to help with a lot of art direction and stuff like that. It's about the words and characterization and plot structure and so on. So can you walk us through a little bit? How do you go about writing or structuring or creating a graphic novel? Do you do the art yourself, or do you partner with somebody else for that? Are you doing end to end the whole thing on your own?
Yeah, so in this case, there's a lot of examples of graphic novels that are more like a division of labor, where there's a writer and an artist, a letterer, colorist, all that. But in my work, I kind of do it all. So I'm kind of like an auteur filmmaker in a sense, where it really is a ton of things you have to design, not only the screenplay, the basic concept, but the costumes, the set design, the coloring, everything. So it is a massive project, but it is one that I just cannot underscore this enough. It is a mess from T to B, top to bottom, a mess. I mean, yes, there is a system that I use, which is I write and then I write longhand in the first draft. I don't go by page. I don't do like panel one and then dialogue. I just write, then I draw alongside the writing, and then I go back to writing. So it's meant to be very intuitive, and the word and the image talk to each other. That's the only way I can build stories. And that's not really something I recommend. It's just my brain does not work on story without image. Words are fundamentally abstract to me. And so I need nouns, I need imagery to help build stories.
Amazing. So why your interest in, as you mentioned, demonology and fear and how communities respond to that badly or well? Like, yeah, why is that something that interests you apart from Nazgûl on your top shelf? Which is okay.
Well, okay. I don't want this to be a sermon or a theological diatribe, but here's what I will say. I think most people, if you dropped them into Salem in 1692, would have behaved exactly the same way as everyone else there, right? There was a kind of mass psychogenic illness that affected this community that on some level, I think we have to have a little lowercase e empathy for. Like we have to understand the human condition, and what happened to these people was it was absolutely evil what happened. And I mean, if you're getting into the theology, I think there was demonic activity there, but not in the sense of like The Exorcist and possession. I think I read some amazing books by Rene Girard about the nature of Satan, and Satan as not being like a literal guy with devil's horns, but like the spirit of accusation itself is a form of demonic presence on earth, right? The sort of antichrist. And I do think that was there. And so it's a very complicated story. And I want to unpack in many ways. I don't know what I think until I write these books. So I have just begun this process and I'm still trying to construct the argument that I'm making in the story. But the goal of it is to drop a young reader. I mean, these are meant for 12-year-olds into Salem and not explain what was going on, but just let them experience it. Like, don't put any explanation or judgment around it. Just say, this is going to be like a first person shooter sort of experience where you're playing a video game where you are in the character that is experiencing these mysterious and scary and strange happenings and trying to say, what is the right response? What would you have done? And we'll see where that goes. And like all graphic novels, they change 100 times over. So come to me in 2028 when this comes out, and I'll tell you more.
2028. Okay, so it takes a while, I would imagine, with all of the art and
Oh
everything.
man, I mean, Mythmakers was a 5-year project. I went to Oxford in 2019 for my research work, and it came out in 2024. So it just these things is 224 pages, and I'm writing everything. It's like a game of Tetris. Like I move one thing, and the whole thing like reflows and changes, and so it's very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Chat says 12-year-olds will ignore explanations anyway, so it's a great strategy.
It's
Yeah,
no, this is the ultimate communication device for young minds in my mind. It's the way I wanted to learn things was I need images, I needed stories. And man, you put a comic in front of a kid, they're never going to read Tolkien's tremendous essay on fairy stories. They're just not. But if I can trick them into reading it by taking a lion, a wizard, and putting them on a dragon ride where they explore, like, why do stories work? Why does fantasy, in Tolkien's words, the highest form of human art, right? Like, why is that? I just think anybody who likes the Avengers or Spider-Man or anything should like understand some of these ideas. So yes, I'm tricking them through pictures.
it's awesome. Tell us about this Mythmakers project. It sounds absolutely epic.
Well, it's basically fan art. I mean, I would not be the creative person I am today without Tolkien and Lewis, and not just because of their faith, which was critical to my framework of the world and the value of imagination in God's universe. Like that's important. But also just like I came to these books as like stories. I was not interested in them in like some kind of theological worldview. But like Narnia just to me is like the text of a kid's story. And I read them out of order because of HarperCollins, committing a sin against all of mankind by reordering them out of publication order. So I read them out of order and did not really clock that they were theological. Like it seems insane actually to say that, but I just wasn't a smart kid. I just thought they were amazing portal fantasies, and I carried The Hobbit around as a kid like it was a Bible. I just loved it. I loved the dragons. And so I made this book as a sort of, I wanted to pass on some of my love, not just of Narnia of Middle-earth, but of their friendship and their fellowship. And most people don't know how amazing their story is.
What is it specific, like, as you're now an adult, looking back on all these formative influences and how the colors and sounds and the magic of it all inspired you, what would be some of your top takeaways about why they've influenced you in your own outlook?
Uh-huh. Well, okay, so Tolkien had this idea of subcreation. He felt that we mimic God, and God is a creator, and we create under his umbrella, right? And Lewis and Tolkien subcreated these other worlds. It was like the highest form of human art to Tolkien, as I said. They subcreated Narnia and Middle Earth, and these places like live in our imaginations as places we want to visit, right? Well, they also subcreated a third thing, which had never really been illustrated in my mind, which was their own friendship is a kind of fantasy world that many people want to live in. I mean, I look at the Eagle and Child and think about, pub on a snowy day with your friends, and like it is a kind of fantasy world, the literary life shared with friends. And I want to step into that too. And so myth makers was a way to write a myth about the myth of their own friendship. And again, myth doesn't mean lie. It just means a story that stands in for a bigger truth that you can't tell any other way, right? And the longing for that friendship and for that thing that we all want in our fellowships, I just wanted to make a book about that. So yeah, I think there is a kind of like longing to enter into stories, and I think that's actually a real holy desire. It's, as Lewis said, it's Zenzucht. It's the longing for longing. It's the scent of a flower that you've never smelled before, and yet you know that by heart. And that's part of what all stories do, I think.
I agree. What a great way to put it. What's some of your own story, John? How did you get to where you are now? What's your origin myth?
Well, it's all drawing. I was not a literary person. It would shock the 12-year-old me to know that I am an author, like that I wrote things. Inkception, thank you. I will steal that.
Go,
That's
Victor.
super good. Yeah, I drew as long as I can remember. I remember tracing Garfield out of the Sunday Funny papers when I was 6 years old. And the love of drawing took me places, really, is the way to say it. I just wanted to make visual things. Eventually that led to the world of illustration. I didn't know I was an illustrator until I got to college and found classes that were like my whole life, even though I was making comics as a kid just for fun. And I love Spider-Man. I read Jim Lee, and I was an illustrator. I was wanting to put words and images together in concert. And that's how I ended up where I am today, was just kind of following what those two things did and the magic of it, because word and images, you put them together, they're not individual components. You get a third thing that is neither word nor image. And that is the art school word is gestalt, right? The whole is more than the sum of the parts. And that happens anytime you read a book with words and images. And the magic of that, I've been chasing that high since I read The Hobbit as a 10-year-old.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes me think about like when people get together and sing, something happens. There's like
Yeah.
well, you sync up and something bigger all of a sudden is there, and it's life-giving, it can be, and healing. I think specifically maybe
Oh,
for men.
I totally. When you go to a stadium and you watch a ball game and something happens and you high five a stranger,
Mhm.
the enjoyment of high fiving a stranger has like an otherworldly sort of joy to it. And the
Yeah.
only way I can describe it is like we were made, and again, I'm going to get in my pulpit, but we were made to worship, basically.
Mhm.
And when we all come together in this collective joy, there is a kind of like, oh, I think this is what we were made for. And in some ways, it's, I think, why sports exist. But
Yeah,
yeah.
agreed. Well, also, I mean, sports is it's a form of storytelling, right? But it's great
Yeah.
because it's live, nerfed warfare. But anyhow, um, that's why fandoms I think are meant to be so awesome because you can instantly look at somebody else at the same Comic Con or the same convention, and you're at the same booth around the same story, and you know this person's soul from the inside out because it's you too.
No,
The
no, this
story is.
is this is the Lewis and Tolkien origin myth. They
Mhm.
met each other at a faculty meeting, 1926, and basically it was like seeing somebody at a con and they're wearing the shirt of your favorite character. Like they got the Wolverine t-shirt on and you're like, "Okay, we're going to be pals." they talked about Norse myths. And at that time, that was not a cool thing. That was like, that's kid stuff. And the fact that two adult men were like geeking out over Norse mythology, and that Lewis joined Tolkien's weird club where they read Norse myths in Icelandic, you know, that was like, oh, we're the same, like you and I. And that's what started their friendship, was basically fandom.
Amazing. That's amazing. Let's talk about this event that you're speaking at. So, Faith That Builds Worlds, hosted by the Jesuits. What is it you're presenting at this event? And why does that topic, Faith That Builds Worlds, matter to you?
Well, so I'm going to be talking about my graphic novel and Lewis and Tolkien specifically, and some of this idea of why, the first thing we learn about God in the Bible in Genesis, the fifth word, it's like right there in the beginning, God created, right? He's a maker. And so Tolkien and Lewis sort of are really good examples of this sort of worldview lived out in the magic of imagination, like the validating of imagination as a godly value, because only God creates ex nihilo, from nothing, right? From nothing, something. That's God's ability that man cannot do, except for this one place, which is in our imaginations. So we image God most clearly when we create. And so that's why this world building as an activity is not just mere escapism or entertainment. It is this kind of like holy act. And it's a really interesting idea when you think about, why? Why would that be a feature that would be so honored in not just like the human imagination, but in our culture? Like, we all love this, right? And it has a fairly recent phenomenon. I mean, even as far as 100 years ago, fantasy writing as a genre for adults is not a thing,
Right,
right? I
right.
mean, the novel is not a thing if you go back 250 years, right? So, like, Dickens is writing stuff that would basically be considered like pulp comics of his era, right? So, the people who were trained, like Tolkien and Lewis, when they were trained, they would never have read novels. They would have read verse. They would have read verse only. And then, like, if you want to read Robinson Crusoe, great, but like, that's on your own time, bro. So the idea that suddenly stories and fantasy stories occupy this in our culture, a pretty hallowed place, with especially, the recent phenomenon of Game of Thrones and George R. R. Martin becoming America's Tolkien, like, it's a very stark world from even 100 years ago. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
That's actually genuinely fascinating I've not slowed down to consider how recent a phenomenon the novel is, and for it to have been catapulted to such heights, and then to now be at a place right now where it's struggling, it's sort of devalued, and it's becoming more valuable, and we don't know what to do with it. I'm curious in the last couple of minutes, what's your hope for the future when it comes to creativity, all the spaces that you're in? Tech is evolving constantly. Human attention and imagination is fragmented beyond belief, or it's just desaturated out of any ability to, it would seem, to be able to use it. But then we're seeing these curious rebel scum fighting back from, all sorts of corners of the internet, and people doing things offline and in person, and reclaiming artistic abilities and talent, and then co-opting tech and doing it in new ways and different ways and so on. As you're looking at the landscape of like everything, what's your hope for the next, 20, 30 years, and you're looking at the human condition, you're looking at what creativity is and all?
Yeah, it's funny. I found a quote from Brush and Pencil magazine, 1918, and it was something like, the way that they have designed it, the artist will soon be unnecessary.
Yeah.
And of course, what they were talking about was the camera, right? The fear in artists were the camera was now going to displace any need for artistic representation. And so if I'm mapping that onto AI, the camera absolutely changed what kinds of art humanity made. But it's ridiculous to think that the technology somehow replaces the artist itself. So I think AI as the future is going to be an amazing tool. I think it's going to be kind of a trend as well. I think there are things that we will look back and be horrified at the sort of weird cringiness of it. And I think it will also be a tragedy. I think it will displace certain artist groups, inside of advertising agencies. Maybe some of the production art pipeline and animation could be displaced. But the like core notion of like human beings love not just result, but process, right? And the more you make that the focus of your time on earth, like I'm not just doing this to get a result. I am not making art to get some sort of useful tool out of it. I am making it to be present in the making and then sharing that with a group of people in the world. Like that is what art is. We make it and we share it. And I just think, no matter what kind of technology is out there, I think you're going to have to advocate for artists. You're going to have to advocate for rights of artists, and people will have to stand up and say, we need to pay people. We need to protect people's rights. But I'm not really worried about the extinction of all artists because, frankly, most of the slop I see out there is just, it's not very compelling.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So, got a question here in the chat from Victor. He says, "Where and when is this convention?" So he's in Louisiana. It's not an online conference, is it? It's happening in person somewhere.
Yes, yes. It'll be in Chicago. Let's see, at on the Loyola campus. I'm pulling on my calendar so I get the dates. March 13th, 14th, 15th. So
Excellent.
yes, that would be the time it's there.
All right. What I'll do is I'll clip out this conversation from the live stream, and I'll put the link to your website in the description, and also for the conference, so that people can check it out. Where can folk find you online, John?
They can find me on Instagram at John Hendrix. That's with an X, like Jimmy. I'm not related. Or johnhendrix.com.
Excellent. Goodness, at the risk of like starting a whole new conversation, apart from Mythmakers, what's been one of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Man, okay, so a few years ago, I started drawing comics in my sketchbook about the Holy Ghost and what he does with his time off, and they always made me laugh. Just every time I sat down in church, I would start a comic and just enjoyed the narrative riffing. It's basically Calvin and Hobbes fan art, but I collected a book of those that came out a few years ago called The Holy Ghost. And I'm really proud of it because it's just a collection of my first love, which is basically like Sunday funny paper comics. And they explore a ghost and a squirrel and a badger sort of talking theology. And yeah, I basically, if you want a tour of all the things I was reading over those years, they sort of trickle down into dumb form. Like, let's take Alistair McIntyre and then let's turn his whole thesis into a dumb comic. That's basically what I'm doing with that book.
It sounds awesome. I'm looking at it on your website. I hope people go check it out. It sounds hilarious. And then let's go the other side. Why did you pick the Nazgûl for a Halloween costume?
Well, so every other
Why
year, so
not?
I mean, I love Halloween. I love making costumes. I like making stuff, and it's one thing I don't get to do as much anymore. Just building. I built a tower of Barad-dûr, Sauron's tower, a few years ago that I wore as a helmet, and that was so exciting that then after that, it was like, what's the next thing I can build? So of course, the Witch King of Angmar's helmet had to be next.
Kidding. And it looks like it's real metal too. Are you a metal crafter, smith person?
No, 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 no. It's listen, you can do wonders with spray paint and chipboard.
Okay. Amazing. Wow. Favorite comic?
Man, I mean, the one that I read as a kid where I was like, every week I went and stood in line and got the issue was when Spawn came out. I was a huge Todd McFarlane fan, and I have Spawn 1 through 50 bagged in my basement that I imagine sending my child to college with. I'm sure they're worth $2 each. But that before that, the original Eastman and Laird Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is so good. And I always tell people to go read those early black and white zines because they're great. The gritty world of TMNT pre like Cowabunga dude stuff is just an incredible universe, and it's worth revisiting if you haven't read it.
Amazing. Oh, that's so fun. Last question for you. What words of encouragement might you have for, well, our community, for our channel? So we're indie fiction authors. Our community it's run by Catholics. We're mostly Catholic. And so we grok this sense of like storytelling can be a vocation, but we have broader people who follow us on the YouTube channel. What words of advice might you have for people who are interested in writing and being creative? For someone who creates as incredibly as you do in all sorts of different mediums, what's advice that comes top of mind for us?
Okay, number one is making art or anything writing, it's just really hard. Okay. Good art, good writing, good music does not want to exist. Okay. So you have to fight for it to be in the world. And I don't know if that's a result of the fall. That's a whole nother conversation. Was Adam able to paint an amazing painting pre Apple? I don't know. But here's what I know. You can't drop a guitar down the stairs and have it play like Hotel California. Like, you have to work at it. And that always involves pain, right? Everything that we value in our lives that is worth something to us is costly, and it will cost you something to make good art. So you just cannot expect that the moment you run into friction with your work, that's a sign from the universe or a sign from the work itself that it's bad. Even though it feels like it's telling you that this is bad, you're actually just encountering what every artist has ever encountered. And every book you've read, when you read that line in the book, you have to remember that the author, when they were writing that, did not know if the book was good or not, right? So just remember that the process of making this stuff is so difficult that you really have to have patience and perseverance, and you have to embrace that struggle is part of what it is to make art. And if you can remember that, then when you're in the pit of despair, you just know, like, oh yeah, I'm here again. Right? This is what is required for me to make good art.